They concluded after the 3-year study that we were dealing not with one group, but we were dealing with at least 4 separate groups. Photographs of crashes, retrievals, landings, and contacts, where they had landed and contacted people, indicated that they were humanoid, all of the 4 different groups. Out of the 4 different groups, all humanoid, one group was so human looking that just like us, they could sit next to us in a restaurant, they could sit next to you in a theater, and you would never know. That was the ones that bothered the admirals and the generals the most. That these guys could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or the Pentagon, or the White House.
Were they?
I have always suspected that, yes, they have been.
Okay, have you met any?
I've met a couple who I am convinced were from somewhere else, yes.
Okay.
But that's another story, and we'd be here till midnight if I got into that. Let me finish with what I was telling you about the SHAPE study. The assessment concluded we were dealing with incredibly advanced technology. We were dealing with 4 different groups, all humanoid, but one group looked totally human. We concluded in this study that they were from somewhere else, another planet, another star system, perhaps another galaxy. We concluded that they were not malevolent or hostile, overtly. They certainly were able to defend themselves. But they did not have an agenda, an aggressive agenda that was hostile, because they had not smashed and torn and broken and destroyed our military.
And this is prior to the abduction scenario that has since come to the fore.
Oh yeah, this was an initial study in '64, based on 3 years of research by the military.
Now, who did the study?
The military.
But who in the military? I'm assuming you weren't part of this.
No, I wasn't. I was working in the war room at Shock.
I mean, was it
the study was underway.
Germans? Was it
the study was underway when I arrived. It was made up of NATO members.
Okay.
There were Germans involved. There were French involved. There were Italians involved.
Scientists?
Americans. They went to some universities and got some of the top people. They got historians, Oxford, Cambridge. They got physicists from several of the top universities in Europe. It was a thorough study.
Was it signed by their in other words, did they sign off on the study? Do you have names?
The individuals who contributed to it, the bits and pieces, would put initials to, what their particular part to it. That you would have anthropologists, historians, geologists.
Okay, but do you know their names? I don't know if you're going to tell me.
No, I know the names of the guys that I was with at SHAPE headquarters who read the damn thing and signed off on it, yes.
Okay, but what about the ones that
no,
worked on
the individuals, I never kept those names because, as I said, this was classified. If I had ever been caught with a piece of paper from this study, I could have gone to jail.
But someone you were working with gave you this to read.
No, I'll tell you how that happened. One morning, 1 or 2 in the morning, we were on these long shifts. I'm bored to death. The coffee was so black you couldn't drink it. The phones are not ringing. The telegraphs were not going off. It was boring as hell. It happens a lot. The old story is military life is 99% boredom and 1% total disaster, total terror. But we were going through the 99% boredom, And I'm sitting there nodding off and read old newspapers, magazines, and all. The controller on duty at the time was an Air Force bird colonel, what we called an 06. All controllers were 6 level. And I ran their duty roster. He looked at me and he went over to the vault and he pulled this thing out and he said, threw it on my desk and he says, "Hey, this will wake you up. Read this." It was the assessment. And it dealt with UFOs.
Okay.
And it concluded that there were extraterrestrials coming here had been coming a very long time, sometimes estimates of 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Historical records in the assessment itself indicated that the Romans had been paying attention to them 2,000 years ago. So I'm going through this thing, and history was one of my majors when I was in college. Good God, this is dynamite. The more I read, the more I wanted to read, and I went through the whole damn thing. And then later, every time I was on duty in shock, I would go over to the vault, pull it out, go through it again. As I
did
said,
you have conversations with your this?
We had limited conversations because you could not discuss classified material outside of shock because there were too many ears.
Sure.
We were having a problem in those days, and let me give you another little side bit here of history. We were in the middle of a vast French spy ring, which, if you really want to do the follow-up on that, you get a book by Leon Uris called Topaz.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It was made into a movie.
That's right.
Uris laid it out. This was a French spy ring was going on in Paris. I was there at the time, and we'd find French Air Force officers. We found a French general one time in the woods outside of Shape with a bullet hole in his head. Guys were jumping out of apartments in Paris. It was a major scandal. De Gaulle was the president.
Okay, but what was the objective of the spy ring?
The spy ring was Soviet, to find out what we knew that they didn't know. So they had been buying and paying off people all over Europe, Hungarians, French,
so
Germans.
What has that got to do with finding the assessment?
What it got to do is, as a side, is that the UFO issue, no information ever came from Washington or London to Shape headquarters on the UFO matter because of the French spy ring. Everything that came from Washington and London to Paris ended up in Moscow. So the NATO headquarters staff, the admiral, there was a British air marshal, Thomas Pike, was the deputy secure. Sir Thomas Pike, after the incident in February of '61, said, we're going to have to figure what the hell's going on here. We're getting nothing from Washington or London on this issue. We ask, they don't send anything. We ask them for information and insight on these objects. Who are they? What's happening? Nothing. Well, nothing was because everything that came from Washington and London ended up in Moscow, thanks to the French, the Hungarians, and the Germans and all. So the study was initiated strictly as a military idea to conclude what the hell was happening for us here. Is there a threat, yes or no? They concluded apparently not, because these guys had been coming and going for a long time. The History Annex took it back a couple of thousand years. The records, the photographs, the drawings, the paintings, it was unbelievable material. This was all just wild for me, you see.
So are you saying that the technology that was used by Hitler and his group, some of which was brought back to the United States, was not known to the West, to the people in NATO that were doing this report?
Of course not. It was highly classified.
But it's a classified document. So you're saying there's
classification. You have a classified document here, and then you have a classified document here, and the guys who wrote this one and have access to this one can't read that one because they don't have the need to know. Okay. Now the guys that have got this one and wrote it and read it and talk about it, they can't read this one because that's another separate classified document.
There's some kind of animosity, I don't know, to this day between NATO, right, and the U.S. and...
Honey, you should have seen the animosity that existed in Shape headquarters itself.
Okay.
It was so bad that the Greeks and the Turks wouldn't even walk on the same side of the corridor. Cyprus was an issue back then, still is. So we had Greeks and Turks snarling and frowning at each other, and we had the French. Oh, excuse me, bless their hearts. The French were a pain in the butt from the very beginning.